Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another live stream, another where we're learning the ropes on how to do this and how it comes across for you guys. I asked a question in the chat, how the volume on that intro, because I blew my own eardrums out by watching or listening back to one of the videos, and it was like boom. And also, could I just get a quick comment on how does this sound? Because interesting enough, over the last 3-4 weeks now that we've been doing this, my volume has been like dynamically changing, and I go back in, I change that on Windows, and then by the time I come out of the stream or come out of any calls, to be fair, for work, it's always bolting back up into the 80s, 90s. So the gain is being increased, which makes it sound terrible. And I actually did some digging about what that could be, and it's actually related to Steam. So Steam has the ability to set auto gain and auto volume and change that accordingly. So it was very dynamic, which was causing the problems that we were seeing potentially last week. But hopefully, if I can get a kind of a yes, this sounds all good, that'd be good to get going, and then I'll start on the session. So yeah, today we're going to continue that Veeam Data Labs kind of journey so we've touched on Shore Backup, we've touched on Secure Restore, we touched on Data Labs in general, and today we're going to be talking about Stage Restore in a bit more detail, and actually when you might use it. I think from a Veeam marketing point of view, I think we only told the stories around GDPR, the right to be forgotten, which is great, right? It's easy to be able to remove information or tables, data from like a production database. Let's say John Smith, we want to remove him from our marketing database. That's quite easy to do on a production SQL box. But if we ever have to recover that SQL box, we have to make sure that we also inject that same process, and that becomes a little bit more difficult. I think traditionally we would have done that by restoring the system and then hoping that no jobs were going to run, like a marketing splash email was going to go out to all of our users. So what Stage Restore allows us to do is inject that process into the restore, and there are lots of different use cases that we're going to kind of hopefully touch on throughout the session. But in particular, when you go to our user guide, which is the Bible for all Veeam backup and replicate or Veeam technologies in general, I find this is still one of the best sets of documentation that's out there, and really gives the real life use case. So in this particular use, it's about removing Active Directory users from the AD if you're restoring that back in. And what we're going to do is we're just going to play with some simple scripts, so around Windows Update, but in particular really just injecting a process to drop a new file on the desktop or something along them lines. So I haven't had anyone tell me that the sound is good, so can someone just give us a yes, sound is good, just so that I'm just not talking and with a talking head, and we're not recording any sound. So what we'll do is, I'll try and leave a link to these descriptive user guides in the description down below for anyone that's picking up this topic later on. I think I've seen a huge increase on, yes, it's great to have you people here to batter ideas around and give some feedback and ask questions. All good. The majority of viewers are definitely on the return, coming back after the stream. Thank you very much, Harris. Yes, the sound is okay, so at least you can hear me. That's all good. So Stage Restore, again, I'll link to these. There are some limitations that I'm going to literally iron out just before we start looking at the actual console, because what I want to do is obviously not be in a slide deck. I want to actually show you this and as much as I can show you it, at least because of the time constraints and because of some of the limitations. So I'm not really bothered about the functionality is only available in Enterprise and Enterprise Plus editions. That's something commercial, not really too interested in that. The big thing though is because we're injecting a process, we need to be able to spin up that Windows machine, that Linux machine in an isolated environment, and we need to be able to inject the script into that running machine. So whereas Secure Restore, we're just taking the content and we're exposing that out and we're running the scan on the mount host. What we're doing here is we're actually having to spin it up and we're actually having to inject that process. So you have to have that pre-configured virtual lab that we touched on a few weeks back for the Sure Backup point of view. The scripts in which you want to inject, although we're going to run them locally within the machine, we need to have them on the VBR server in that on a local folder. So that's just down here. And if you're going to do it to multiple machines, let's say it is Windows Update and we're going to bring back 10 machines, let's say 5 of them are Windows and 5 of them are Linux, then they need to be 2 separate jobs. We obviously, because the script for Windows updates, for example, would be very different to running the apt-get update commands within your Linux distro. So have 2 separate strains of being able to inject that process into those. And that's really what that one's saying. The other one is, I put this in a hidden feature, like a fantastic features and where to find them session a few years back, and it was mostly around Veeam quick migration. And this was it was developed before, but a lot of our small customers would have used this, and it's the ability to quickly migrate machines from site A to site B, or infrastructure A to infrastructure B, net new from old to new kind of thing. Obviously now we have, and we're spoilt with storage vMotion in general across different vCenters. It made this a little bit more redundant, but it's still there. So this is what we're leveraging to move that data from the isolated environment into production. So then that leads me on to, well, how does this work and where do we see it? So the first thing is we see it in entire VM restore only. And I think the important thing here is that the majority of people are probably thinking, well, I only use instant VM recovery, which is obviously a super fast way of being able to recover that workload. But entire VM restore gives us a few benefits when it comes to actually being able to run this or get that restore functionality back up and running. And one is that, so instant VM recovery has an impact on the storage that it's sat on, because it's ultimately the backup file is being stored on that, and we're streaming that through. So the IO is happening on that, all on that backup storage, which potentially will be a slower set of spinning disks, maybe not even flash. So we have to take that into consideration. Whereas this is a much more, as much as it takes a little bit longer, and this is more of the traditional way of restoring, it's going to be much less impactful to the overall environment. And I think that is kind of summarized in there as well. I'm going to show a few PowerShell scripts, so where this really could come into a process rather than it just being the backup admin's job. So over on Veeam Hub, on the GitHub page that is managed by the Veeam community, we have some PowerShell scripts that I've uploaded there that we can use for certain stage restore scenarios. And then I've put this together. I think I've pimped this out every single video so far, and if not, this is something from the beginning of 2020, around when V10 actually landed. And it was touching on Veeam Data Labs, a bit like the overview session that we did at the very beginning of the streams. And it really touches on what is and why would you use it. But then it's also got some links down below to some white papers that I've written in terms of all of that theory and logic and the technical know-how is built into those white papers to enable you to actually get up and running when it comes to using any of these data labs features. And then in particular, there's this there's a video that has been done that kind of touches very, very briefly on how you would run that stage restore. The whole point of what I'm doing here is I actually want to show you some of the scenario, walk through actually what it looks like, and just show how easy it is to start injecting those processes into your backup job. So first of all, because it's an entire VM recovery, I've run the job beforehand, but what we'll do is we'll kind of work backwards. Is that I'll show you what that log looks like, and then we'll build out as if we were going to do it live. So if we jump into our VBR server, first of all, again, if you weren't there for the initial, we've got our virtual labs. So we've got those configured in our different locations. We have our application groups, and that's important because let's say that we're stage restoring a SQL database or a file server, and it's authenticated by Active Directory, but we don't want to restore Active Directory, but we need Active Directory to be able to authenticate in that isolated environment. We might want to build out that application group at that point. So again, just for reference of how these bits work together. So then if we just go down to full VM restore, and if I open up this, so this is the job, and this again should look very familiar to what we see from a Azure backup job, is that it's going to acquire its lab resource, it's going to start that virtual lab, it's going to publish it, it's going to reconfigure. This is the machine in question that I want to inject a process into, so it starts publishing that particular virtual machine, and then powers on, powers off, stops it, etc. Now if we click on into that machine, we start to see a little bit more of the process of what we're doing. So see, in this particular instance, this backup lives on a dedupe appliance. It lives on an exagrid. So already the performance is going to be not as fast when it comes to recovery. So a potentially prime example as to when we would use entire VM recovery over instant VM recovery. But again, it still works, and it's about choice, and it's about what you need to do with that machine. So stage restore is only applicable to entire VM recovery, whereas instant VM recovery is where you can use secure restore before it gets recovered. But with instant VM recovery, it does give you the opportunity to recover that workload much faster, maybe into a different environment, that you can inject your own process into, which many of customers have been doing in the past before this feature even came around. So just to highlight there, this isn't a new feature. This actually landed with Veeam Backup and Replication 9.5 Update 4, and it's been there obviously for those couple of years. So we're going to define what virtual resources we're going to use. We're going to pick that virtual lab, and again we'll go through the backup job or the restore job to understand where this is all selected, and you have the choice to position this wherever you want. Then you've got the VM in which we want to stage restore. You've got all of the operating system and everything that we have there. And really, this isn't about, we don't want to test the backup at this point. So, okay, we might give it the maximum boot time. And again, I'll show you what that looks like, the application initialization. But we're not going to be looking for a specific heartbeat or a ping test or any scripts or file validation from that. What we're going to do is we're going to provision it into our isolated environment. We're going to tell it where our production is, because remember, this is part of that ongoing restore. This is just a stop point for the injection of the process to happen. And then this is where we start to see where it lands in that isolated environment. So if we wanted to, and you'd have to be relatively quick to do this, but all possible because you could put delays into the script. This is where we could access that isolated environment. we could make changes before it heads off back into production. So we see that it's booted up successfully. We see that the application is successful as well, whichever that may be that we've assigned to that particular machine. And then we go and execute this stage restore script. And at that point, we see that it's successfully executed, and it starts then that migration from there into the production. So there's a few things to unpack there, but first of all, what the script that I used was a very simple script. It was literally, I want to create a text file on the desktop. But now imagine, and obviously that's very simple and nobody probably needs to do this, but it's simulating what and why we're doing this. And I'll jump onto that machine shortly as well, and just to prove that it's there in this newly restored machine and not in the failed machine that is the reason why we're restoring. But in doing this opens up the door for us to trigger Windows Update or application updates or changes or injection of remove Active Directory users or remove specific files, or even I've seen this is the ability to mask data. So if entire VM restore doesn't have to be back to its original location, we've got the ability to send this to a test and dev type environment. Now, if that's a SQL box, and let's say that SQL box contains your marketing database, and you don't want, or you shouldn't want, your developers maybe having access to that sensitive information, like names, like email addresses, like phone numbers, all of that stuff, that actual PII, well, we could write a script that enables us to hash that out within the database. That's really anything you can run. And I'll get into what that looks like, because it doesn't have to be PowerShell. We could use lots of different ways of being able to inject a process into a system. So before we jump into the job, let's quickly just take a look at the actual machine. So this is the restored machine. So if we jump into here, and on the desktop, you're going to see that simple, very simple, and it's really just proving a concept that we've got that stage restore test input. So we've injected that process into the restored machine. Now, if we go back in, and this did come from a different location, a different vCenter. So if we dive into here now, and we go and find that particular machine, which I believe was Agent 1, and we go and look at what that looks like on the production side, or pre entire VM restore, not that one, but you'll see that there was no file there. So we've injected that process into it. I mean, pretty simple stuff, like in regards to me running that simple script, but I'm hoping that everyone listening can see other benefits in where and what this could be actually capable of. Okay, so let's jump back in here before I come back to the other PowerShell script that I wanted to show. That's what I linked before. So, like I say, this is only applicable to entire VM recovery. So if we go in here, we are not going to find it in these other areas. We're only going to find it in this entire VM restore. So what that looks like is, so let's in particular, let's go and let's find that same backup job, just so that if I can spell. And then this is where it's important to state what you want to do. So yes, obviously there may be no injection of script that you want to do, and that's fine. So we want to restore to the original location. Or we can, again, with the same premise, I don't want to inject a process. I just want this machine that was here in this location. I want it over here in my test and dev environment. And I don't need to mask any data. I don't need to inject any scripts. Or we want to inject the script, and this is where stage restore comes in. Now, we can pick a proxy to use as well, because we're going to need to access the storage that we're restoring to, and that helps with the migration of that data. So I'm just going to leave that as default for now. This is where we can also change where it's going to be restored to. So as much as that first option says back to its original, to a new location, and then stage restore, well, stage restore actually gives you the same functionality to be able to send it to a different location, but by being able to inject a process into that. So we can say, so very much the opposite to what I did the other day was, I want to send it from that where you saw it, where you saw the injected process. I want to send it back into the other location. So again, we choose the resource pool that we want that to land in. We choose the storage type as well, in which we want to restore it to. We can choose the name. So if we wanted to change the name of it, but also restore vSphere tags, we can do that here. Yeah, so that's going to. So that isn't. In fact, that's why I wanted to do it this way. So you saw that I had the production machine in place, and what this is warning me is that, well, you're going to restore over the top of what you've already got there, which may or may not be beneficial. If this is a web server and you're just injecting a process into that to update the theme, and there's no stateful data within that virtual machine, well, then you might be okay just to restore over the top. Obviously, there's an element of downtime there where we pull that one down and we pull that one back up, but it's quite minimal to that effect. But there's obviously still downtime, so you'd want to make sure that was built into your recovery plan. So, but again, it warns you, it makes sure that you know that. Then we get to choose the network, and remember, this is all about the restored scenario. So forget about the stage restore and the isolated environment. We'll get to that. This is how you want that machine to look when you recover that data, or how it needs to look once the data is recovered. Then we've still got that secure restore option that we spoke about last week. And then this is where we define what it is we want to inject into the system. So I mentioned around the virtual lab. So again, we choose a virtual lab. Now, my advice is to choose a virtual lab in the location that you're restoring to, but it doesn't need to be. Say you had a test or pre-prod environment and you wanted to do the pre-patch there before it goes back into production, you can absolutely do that. Just be aware that when we do that quick migration, which is completely possible across these different vSphere environments, that needs to be obviously taken into account in terms of latency and throughput. So we choose our virtual lab. We could then, like I mentioned, around if we needed that Active Directory or the domain controller, we can choose one of those application groups at that point. We then have to go and choose our script, which I'll get to. And then because we're injecting the process inside of the machine, so I'm going to run the script inside of that VM, we have to pick those as well. So this is where I was going to talk about the different types of scripts. So it doesn't have to be scripts. We can run exe files, bat commands and CMD files, PowerShell, Bash, and pretty much those are the types of injection types that we support on there. So all I did was I think I have it stored conveniently on my desktop. So if I jump down into desktop, I should now see that simple stage restore. Now, the backup admin may have access, but I want to make sure that I've got access into that, and that just so happens to be the same one that I'm on as well. And then if we go advanced, which is generally always where we can obviously set the advanced settings. Now again, if you remember when we were looking at application groups, then you would have seen these three options there. So from the amount of memory to allocate. Now generally, we always talk about, well, just in case you are constrained on memory, then we can reduce that down to 50%. But it also works the other way, or at least it does from a sure backup point of view. So if we wanted to actually double the memory in that machine, then we can do that by adjusting the percent there. Then again, also remember that time, which is irrelevant really, because the storage migration, the actual migration process is always going to take longer than things like the maximum boot time. I think the premise of this is not about getting your data back up and running as fast as possible. It's about getting your data back up and running in the best possible state it needs to be before it lands back into production. So we can tweak what that maximum allowed boot time looks like. We can tweak what that application initialization timeout also looks like in here as well. And then that's it. Then it's next, and it's a case of giving you a reason, so for auditors, but then hitting next and allowing that to go. Now, what I will actually do is let me go back. If there's any questions, then maybe it's a good time to drop them in now, because so what I want to do actually is I'm going to throw it to the same host. So I'm going to throw it to this system. I'm going to use the resources I don't care about. Data store I don't care about. Now name, I'm going to say, let's call it Agent X. I'm using this for other demos, but ultimately it's a Windows VM. And I want it to land where it is. I think actually the data store, this is where we can also change what disk type is, which I think is important to mention as well, because if you're running a normal entire VM recovery, I believe it has to be thick. Maybe someone who has read the manual or used that can confirm that. But what this gives us, because we're doing a two-part restore, we're able to restore a specific disk type. Maybe we'll check that afterwards as well. So again, give it the name. I don't want to connect it. Stage restore. Yep, no application group, all of that stuff. In fact, let me choose this distributed lab, which is in that environment. And let's not power it on, it's not going to happen. So again, this is how we started the session, right? This was us looking into, that was going through those steps. So if we then jump back onto our vSphere environment, first of all, we're going to see that distributed lab, our virtual lab proxy appliance, that's now going to be spinning up. Then we're going to see the virtual machine, so TPM04 -agent-x, but then we're going to see a long UUID appear. That nothing to be concerned about. That's just us spinning it up in the isolated environment. It's going to enable us to perform our injection of script, and then we're going to automate that migration into production. Now, for that particular machine, it's a 50 gig machine in my lab environment, so it's going to take around 55 minutes. Now, I'm not expecting everyone to hang around for that, but I just wanted to show what that process looks like between actually what it looks like, rather than just showing you the restore session logs that we initially looked at. So while that's building out, I wanted to just show you what the actual entire VM recovery stage restore script looks like as well. So hopefully everyone can see that. So there's three options, and it really falls in line to those three options that you saw very at the start of the entire VM restore wizard. So these are all the variables in what we want to use or how we define them. And then you've got these three options to start that VBR restore. Now the middle one is where we define the staging script here. So it's hyphen staging. Well, first of all, this enabled stage restore is going to set that flag to allow us to actually have that wizard option that we saw within VBR. Next, we need to identify and define our staging script. So again, you're going to see that says simple underscore stage restore, which is that simple file creation. Then we need some credentials to get inside of that machine to start that script. Then which staging virtual lab proxy appliance are we going to use? And then what options we have for that. Now, if I jump back quickly to what options we've set, this is where we say about the maximum boot time, the application, and the memory of the allocation of percent. You see here that I was already testing to see what that machine looks like from a 200% point of view. So super simple script, and then think about where you could add this in to your test and development cycles to, instead of that script being such an easy, simple script, to just create a file, which is kind of great for demos, terrible for production. But where you could start to mask data away from people that they need access to your systems, but they don't need access to all of the data or the data types that you've potentially got. So that gives you the ability to inject that. So just to quickly round this out, so what we do is, let's just go back to vSphere. Exactly as I said. So it comes back. Sorry, I mentioned agent-x. It obviously takes its original name. It does the injection of process. And then at this point where it quick migrates over, it's then going to inject that name change into that. But from here, this is completely isolated from your production system. So you could get into that in that if I find out what if we go here, we can find that IP address. There, 10.255. So in theory, if I jump on here, and I ping 10.255, which is coming from that masquerade IP that we set within the virtual lab. So if I ping that, and I bet I've missed it because I bet it's already... Yeah, it looks like it's already on its way down. But hopefully you get the idea, is that you've got access into that system to be able to do your own thing, providing that the script, because this is fully automated as well. So as soon as that script finishes, that's going to power down that machine very quickly. It's going to power down the virtual lab proxy appliance. And if you're in there trying to do your own manual work, well, then that's potentially going to be lost. So bear that in mind, is that when you inject that script, you might want to put a wait time in there to say, wait for X amount of minutes or hours even, so that you can get your work done before it then continues that restore process. Right, it doesn't look like any questions came in, so I think what we'll do is, so next week, I forget what I said, but again, there's plenty more still to cover on the Veeam Data Lab subject. I think it was on-demand sandbox. So what we're going to be doing is actually looking at how we take a group of machines from storage, from backups from replicas, most likely backups and storage snapshots, merge them together, spin up the isolated environment, really allow another team to go in and do what they need to do on that data without affecting our backups, without affecting production, and yeah, some of the options around that. So hopefully, and I'll keep it to like the same time, and there you go. So that starts that quick migration, which is actually the long term, that it takes longer, in that this is now going to move that data from where it was into the new data store. But yeah, with that, thanks for watching. And yeah, any questions, leave them in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to answer them. But if there's something that I've missed that you guys are doing or that you want to see, regardless of whether it's Veeam Data Labs or whatnot, I know that the Veeam Data Labs series, if you will, the next few weeks will see us up to V11, and then we've got all sorts of new goodies to highlight in there. So hopefully it's useful. Thanks for everyone watching either live, but also on the follow-up and watching them after the fact. Hopefully the audio issues are getting better. But yeah, thanks guys, and have a good one.